Today at the National Press Club, the Minister for Resources and Northern Australia, Matt Canavan. Senator Canavan will focus on the mining industry and argue it remains crucial to the national economy and to rural Australia. Here's Matt Canavan with today's National Press Club address.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the National Press Club of Australia in today's Westpac address. I'm Sabra Lane, I'm the president of the club. I'm also the host of the ABC radio program AM. Today's event is being co-hosted by the National Rural Press Club of Australia, and our guest today is the Resources Minister and the Minister for Northern Australia, Matt Canavan. If you're following the conversation online, please use the hashtag NPC, and our Twitter handle is @PressClubAUST. The title of the Minister's speech is The Long Mining Boom. Please welcome Matt Canavan.
Well, thank you very much, Sabra, and thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for being here today. I really want to thank the Press Club for putting on this initiative, particularly co-hosting an event with the Rural Press Club here in Canberra as well. We do need more voices from the regions, from our rural areas, heard in Canberra, and I thank you very much. Thanks to Colin for this invitation, and I think the first event that they're co-hosting. Today I am here to talk about the mining industry. I'm here to talk about rocks and hydrocarbons and all those inanimate objects, but I actually do want to start talking about people, because that's what makes this industry great. I want to talk about a lady called Alicia. I met Alicia at the Peak Downs coal mine in central Queensland last year. BHP coal mine or BMA coal mine. Alicia's a young engineer, young graduate who got her start, her first professional job up there at that mine. She moved herself from Brisbane to Dysart for the job. And our industry, the mining industry, gives lots of young Australians their first start in life. Second, I want to talk about Elizabeth. Elizabeth owns a company called Gecko Systems, which she literally started from her garage in Ballarat, and she now sells engineering technologies for the gold industry right around the world. I saw her in Toronto just the other week selling her wares over there. This sector gives so many people in Australia the opportunity to compete on the global stage. Third person we'll speak about is Roger. Roger, he manages the Hideaway Resort at Great Keppel Island, which I live just off the coast of in central Queensland. But he is actually a third-generation coal miner. He loves the coal industry, but he loves the reef too, and he knows that so many of his customers can only afford to come out to the island and enjoy the beauty of the reef because they've got a good paying job in the mining sector. Fourth person I want to mention is actually here today, Patrick Malone. And I note Irene Simpson is also here today, another elder, both elders of the Wangan and Jagalingou peoples. They're the elders who have the native title rights over the land for the Adani Carmichael mine. You might have heard of it before. They support the development of the mine, as does another 292 elders of the Wangan and Jagalingou peoples who turned up at an authorisation meeting in Maryborough about 2 years ago now, and where the Adani mine was supported 294 to 1 in favour of going ahead. And I support this industry because it support the mining sector because it gives our first Australians the opportunity for economic advancement and a job. So we often do here, particularly in this place, in Canberra, think about the industry in terms of billions of dollars of exports, thousands of jobs, all these big numbers, but that's not why the industry is important. It's important because of the people that it supports around our country. It's important because of the families that it helps to provide for and keep them in a home. And I'm humbled to be the Resources Minister in what I think is the greatest resources country in the world because of the great people I get to meet, like Roger, like Elizabeth, like Alicia, and like Irene and Patrick. These are great people, great Australians. Now, some are suggesting that our mining sector is not as important as perhaps as it used to be, or we need to diversify the economy to other things. Well, I think we're actually in the right place at the right time because the mining sector has never been more important to the modern world as it is today. Mining's always been important to human development. If you just look at history, we often define whole eras and epochs of human development as the Bronze Age or the Iron Age or what have you. You couldn't reduce today's age to one mineral because we rely on so many of them for everything we enjoy in life. can see a lot of my friends in the press there on their phones already, on Twitter or those sort of things. I hope all your phones are on silent, as was suggested that you do today. But if it's not on silent and it starts ringing, it'll make a clear sound, it'll make a clear ringtone, thanks to a rare earth called neodymium. That rare earth is what makes speakers work in such small little devices like phones. And neodymium is so young as a mineral, it was only discovered in 1885. It's not known in the Iron Age or the Bronze Age. And a mobile phone, in fact, is made up of 25 different minerals and metals in its manufacture. We produce 18 of them here in Australia. A solar panel is made up of 16 different minerals and metals. We produce 10 of those here in Australia. So mining is as important as it has ever been to our economy, and its importance is only likely to increase in the future. The view that the mining boom is somehow over is fundamentally wrong. Australian mining has been booming for more than 50 years. There's actually no reason to suggest that it won't continue to do in the next 50. We have, of course, gone through a tumultuous 10 years with a massive surge in investment and exports in the past decade. But we shouldn't let that hide the longer-term trend that has occurred across a long mining boom in this country for half a century. It's easy to forget that before the 1960s, before that time, the mining industry was actually only of limited importance to Australia. We've gotten used to coal and iron ore and now gas being our biggest exports, but that wasn't always the case. In the mid-1960s, mining accounted for just 10% of Australians' exports. There was no coal export really to speak of, and iron ore exports were banned from this country. A major review of the Australian economy in the 1960s, the Vernon Report, concluded that the mining sector is not a major sector of the economy. It said that Australia's resource exports would only grow to $300 million by the mid-1970s. They ended up growing to $1.2 billion, 4 times that amount. Now, things changed in the 1960s unexpectedly because of the growth of Japan and its emergence. Later, of course, we've grown export markets to Korea and China, and today the resources sector represents 7% of our economy, 55% of our exports, and around 14% of annual investment in this country. Now, will demand for commodities continue to increase in the future? Well, nothing is for certain, of course, but the facts are there are still 1 billion people in the world without electricity. There are about just over 750 million people in the world who are still defined as being in poverty, and in about 75 countries, fewer than 50% of people live in cities. There's still huge amounts of urbanisation and development to occur in the world, and that is likely going to mean a massive increase in resources alongside with that. Let's hope, I hope that more people can come out of poverty, and if they do, that'll be good news for Australia's resources. And I should also welcome, I should have welcomed at the start those outside this place. It is a democracy, and I welcome all the opinions and views. And it's a sector worth supporting, in my view, because of the people here in this room, like Patrick, like Irene, who do want to see a strong resource sector. I welcome the views of outside, but I do want to make this point in Canberra that recently 10 people were charged with trespassing on Adani's property up at Bowen. 9 of the 10 were from interstate, not even from Queensland. The other one was from Cairns, a fair way away from Bowen. And we, I hope, cannot lose our ability to listen to other parts of our country, not just the major cities. And if we're going to lift millions of people out of poverty, as I was saying, we're going to need a lot more resources, including coal. And what's good for our resources sector is good for the development of the world. Some say that China's now slowing, but its GDP per capita is still 14% of the United States'. India is the fastest major growing economy in the world. It's a young country too. 1 million Indians turn 18 every month. Every month 1 million Indians turn 18. And there's also massive growth occurring in Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, Vietnam and many other countries in our regions. That includes those increased resource demands is going to include increased demand for Australian coal. Australian coal is some of the highest quality in the world, and we produce it more efficiently than most too. That puts our coal sector and thousands of Australians who work in it in pole position to take advantage of the increase in demand for resources. I find it disappointing that a Labor Party that purports to represent workers, including coal mine workers, is talking down our second biggest export industry. I find it very disheartening. Mark Butler says that the coal market's in structural decline. Bill Shorten is opposed to new coal mines from opening up. They are not just failing to back Australian jobs and Australian know-how, they are also flat out incorrect. In the first 15 years of this century, first 15 years of the 21st century, thermal coal demand increased by 73%. In the 15 years before that, demand only increased for thermal coal by 25%. Now, of course, there's conjecture about what the future demand for coal will be, but I reckon Yogi Berra said it right when he apparently said that, that predictions are very hard, especially those made about the future. Take the last 15 years that I mentioned. At the beginning of this century, the International Energy Agency predicted that the demand for coal by 2020 would be 3.4 billion tonnes of oil equivalent. By 2015, it was already 3.8 billion tonnes of oil equivalent, 15% higher and 5% earlier than the prediction. Under its central scenario today, the IEA predicts that demand for thermal coal in our region, which is the relevant region for our market, will be more than 480 million tonnes of coal higher in 2040 than it is today. We in this country produce only 250 million tonnes of thermal coal a year. We're only 4% of global production, but we have high-quality coal that's likely to remain in hot demand as it is essential for the efficient operation of modern coal-fired power plants. Based on the IEA projections, based on their projections until 2040, we will have to produce as much coal in the first 40 years of this century, the world will have to produce as much coal in the first 40 years of this century as it ever has before in history. Ever has before in history. That is the size of the coal market today. The growth of the Australian resources sector is not incompatible with a low-carbon future. It is essential to obtaining it. If Australia were to shut down all its coal mines, it would be replaced by lower quality coal in other countries that would increase carbon emissions. The greater use of gas is also essential for lowering carbon emissions in our region. Moreover, many clean energy products can only be made from the inputs of the mining sector. Hybrid and electric vehicles use nickel and lithium in their batteries and contain far more copper than standard vehicles. If electric vehicles do take off, Dr Ian McFadden of Uncover Australia predicts that we'll need to produce more coal in the next 20 or 30 years than we ever have before in history as well. Earlier this year, Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull travelled to the United States to talk with President Trump, and over there he signed a critical minerals alliance deal to cooperate with the United States in the production of these types of minerals that go into modern products. Not just clean energy products, but defence technology, space technology. They're all, the mining industry is essential for them all. On my recent trip to the United States, I caught up with Secretary Zinke, the Secretary of the Interior, and we agreed to develop a memorandum of understanding between Geoscience Australia and the United States Geological Survey to cooperate on the increased exploration and production of critical minerals. The United States has put together a list of 35 critical minerals they see as important to their economy, and Australia is in the top 5 for reserves for 13 of those minerals. We have great opportunities in this sector. All of this does spell opportunity for Australia, but it's not going to fall into our lap. It didn't 50 years ago, and it's not going to today. Back then, 50 years ago, there were large steelmaking companies in Australia that opposed the removal of the iron export ban. They wanted to keep iron ore here in Australia cheap and abundant for themselves. The CSIRO in the 1960s advised the government that we should not allow increased coal exports because we didn't have enough coal for our own use here in Australia. Obviously, they were wrong. It was courageous that governments stood up against that lobbying and some of that advice to make the right decisions. But there's no guarantee we're going to continue to make the right decisions today because, again, we have people arguing against coal exports for dubious and self-serving reasons. We have people saying we should keep all our resources here for our own industry and not take advantage of prices overseas. We've seen a reduction in our world ranking as a resource investment. From the first, we were top in the Fraser Institute's world ranking. Just last month, we fell to second on that order behind Canada. More worryingly, the states and territories in Australia have dropped even further on those rankings. We must respond if we're going to regain that top spot, and I think, given the opportunities available, we should do everything we can to do that. We must work really hard to remain competitive in Asian energy and resource markets. We've got some great advantages. We're the closest country, big resource country to be able to supply. 92%, more than 90% of our iron ore mines are below the average cost of production in the world, yet there are challenges emerging. The United States will soon be a net energy exporter for the first time since the Korean War. Already, the US can ship LNG to Asia at rates that are competitive to our industry here in Australia. Last year, the US increased its coal exports by more than 60% in 1 year. We've had a good run for the last 50 years, being the only developed country that's been able to supply resources to the Asian region, but that is likely to change. We have funded as a government 2 industry growth centres, one to service the mining supports industry, the MET sector, the other to help the oil and gas industry to develop new techniques to become more competitive. And today I can announce that the government will invest a further $50 million into establishing a MinEx CRC, which will deliver more productive, safer and environmentally friendly drilling methods and introduce new technologies for collective dating while drilling that there's never before been done. This will help maintain the competitiveness of our sector. Second, we must ensure that regional areas continue to benefit from the mining sector. Australia is a world leader in resources technologies. You just have to go to some of the mines in the west to see the amazing autonomous vehicles that are already working. But I am concerned that these new technologies potentially take jobs out of regions and put them in the major cities. And I do think one of the key results that our mining sector has delivered to this country is the development of many country towns right across the country. Cairns, even Melbourne, Mount Isa, Kalgoorlie, Broken Hill, Ballarat, all these cities owe their birth, their growth to the mining sector. And I want to make sure we continue to do that in the future. Third, and it's a related point, we must bolster community support for the resources sector. There's a lot of talk about this term social licence, but someone pointed out to me the other day that the actual term had its origins in getting the support from your local community, where you operate, where you work. And the most important thing for the sector, in my view, to do is to get their own workers, their own community on side first. If we can do that, we do also need to make sure we sell the benefits of the sector to the rest of Australia and the economy. And we should also promote the strong environmental performance that the sector has clearly achieved. We are world's best leaders in environmental management technologies for the resources sector, and it is an area where we must maintain our world-leading practices. However, we must also increase the timeliness of major project approvals in Australia. Too many projects have been held up for years in delay, and too many groups are seeking to abuse our legal system for a wider agenda than just environmental protection. Fifth, we must make new discoveries in minerals and energy. Our first major copper find in Australia was found actually by a wombat. A wombat was kicking up some rocks in a place called Wallaroo in South Australia in 1859. A stockman saw this. The rocks looked a bit green, so he went and had them assayed, and turned out they had copper. And there we go. Now, most of our mineral finds, in fact, have been found in the same way. Not from a wombat, but from the rocks. From the rocks. So people see the rocks. I saw that in Mount Isa. You can just go there and see the rocks, think there might be mineralisation. You start to drill and you find something. But those rocks, that outcropping only really occurs over about 20 to 30% of our land mass. The rest of it, the rest of the country, is pretty much unexplored. And we've got to do more to try and uncover the rest of the country to find the new mineral finds that will give life to the industry over the long term. That's why we're investing $100 million to use aeromagnetic and seismic testing, new techniques to try and find new discoveries in this unexplored parts of our country. Six, we must ensure that we efficiently do make use of our natural resources to value add and to create more jobs in wider sectors. We've got a strong history of doing so. BHP had a big growth in its own business by using coal, Australian iron ore, to turn into steel. We have very strong and vibrant copper, zinc, nickel and aluminium refining sectors. Altogether, the metals manufacturing sector employs more than 50,000 Australians. There's no reason we shouldn't seek to maintain our strength in this industry. We have new opportunities to expand lithium production. We're the world's largest producer of lithium, and I want to see us try to make sure that we also become a world leader in lithium processing as well. The major risk, though, to all this happening is higher energy prices in Australia. We as a government are committed to finding a long-term solution, long-term policy through the National Energy Guarantee, and I think that will help attract investment and help lower prices. A component of the increased prices has been the increase in the price of gas. These price increases have occurred because our cheap gas from the Bass Strait is declining and we're replacing it with a higher cost to produce gas from Queensland. Thank God we do have the Queensland coal seam gas industry, because things would be a lot worse without it. Last year, however, gas prices became higher here in Australia than they existed in our major export markets, and that was an unsustainable outcome. That's why we acted to establish a framework to control gas exports. In the end, we came to a voluntary agreement with the industry to return more gas to Australia, and that is having real results. Prices in Australia have fallen from 10 to 15 gigajoules, $10 to $15 a gigajoule last year to about $7 to $10 a gigajoule today. The small work does need to be done, though, because gas export controls are not the long-term answer. They're not the answer we need over time. We need more supply. And states and territories that maintain bans on gas development, despite all the overwhelming scientific evidence, are doing a great disservice to our country and putting our long-term economic competitiveness at risk. We at the Commonwealth Government support the development of our gas industry, and that's why we're investing $26 million to accelerate more gas production in Australia. Today I can announce that the government will fund 4 projects under our gas acceleration program. These projects will deliver an additional 12.4 petajoules of gas in the next 2 years, extra gas that won't help fix the problem but will alleviate the situation we face. All of the challenges I have described above are long-term ones. There is no policy action that overnight will fix all of these issues. Meeting the challenges will require consistent and strong policy action over many years, including from different governments of different political persuasions, I'm sure. I am concerned that our political debate on resources is becoming too partisan, and we are at risk of missing the wider opportunities available for the sector. For Australia to stay ahead of the game, it's not good enough for us just to keep doing what we have done. We have to develop new ways of working, new ideas and new technologies. I believe that we would benefit from a stocktake of resource policy settings in this country, an opportunity to take a breath and review carefully and calmly the settings we need to keep Australian mining strong. To do that, I am announcing today that we will establish a Resources 2030 task force. This task force will work with the government to generate the new ideas to take advantage of the abundant opportunities before the sector. I will appoint Andrew Cripps, the former Queensland Minister for Natural Resources, as chair of this committee. Andrew brings great experience of the resources industry and also a state government perspective, a fresh set of eyes, if you like, to Commonwealth issues. I will also appoint 8 other members to the task force with a broad experience across the industry. Erica Smith has a long history in the oil and gas sector and also is the chair of the advisory board for the environmental regulator NOPSEMA. Will Robinson is president of the Association of Mining and Exploration Companies, representing small companies across the sector. Mike Henry is the current president of operations for BHP in Australia. Marsha Langton is a nationally recognised Indigenous voice and leader in their community and has spoken regularly on resources issues. Joyce McCulloch is the mayor of Mount Isa, a great mining town. Paul Flynn, who's here today, I think, the CEO of Whitehaven Coal, and Chris Pygram, who is the former CEO of Geoscience Australia and a great geologist in his own right. I believe this panel has there's a right mix of regulatory, industry, environmental, community and government and economic skills to map out a long-term agenda for the sector. Without limiting their work, I will ask them to focus on a few key priorities, including attracting investment, contributing to regional economic growth, cutting red tape, finding new mineral areas, bolstering community support for the sector and making sure that we do use Australian resources to create Australian jobs. They've got a big job and I'm asking them to come back to us in 6 months, after which later this year, with my ministerial colleagues, the government will establish a National Resources Statement. It'll be the first time since the 1990s that we've done such a statement, and other countries such as Canada are doing similar things at the moment. We have to work hard to maintain our preeminent position as a mining country and a strong resources nation. If we can do that, there'll be many more opportunities for Australians to benefit from a strong resources sector. A stronger resources sector will mean more jobs for people like Alicia. A stronger resources sector will mean more opportunities for Australian businesses to start from a garage like Elizabeth and take their business to the world stage. A stronger resources sector will mean business for other industries across Australia, including tourism, which relies so heavily often on a strong economy in their local areas. And most importantly, a strong resources sector will help fulfil our promise to our first Australians to give them the economic opportunities that so many of us take for granted. That's how I'll judge whether our resources policy is successful or not. I will judge it not in terms of dollars earned or the amount of exports we achieve or even the taxes we get here into Canberra, which so many want to use as a benchmark often for the sector. How I'll judge the success of the resources policy in this nation is how many people it can help to have a job, to provide for their family and carve out a better future for themselves. I'm confident that we will continue to be a very strong resources sector. I'm confident that it will grow from strength to strength in the next 50 years. And I hope the rest of Australians can back us on this journey to make our Australian mining sector strong and stronger than it ever has been. Thank you very much and God bless.
Thank you for that speech. And kicking off our questions from the floor is Colin Beatles.
Is it on? Thanks. Matthew, Colin Bettles from Fairfax Media, Rural Media. I'm just interested, obviously, in your views on the cricket situation, but also
first.
Your speech does cover the resources sector, but you're also the Northern Australia Minister. So I'm just wondering, what are you actually doing in that space in terms of things like the CRC that you've set up there to look at agricultural projects that can help enhance economic growth in the north as well? Have they been ignored in your quest to pursue issues regarding resources? Thank you.
Thank you, Colin. I might deal with the Northern Australian first, if given it goes to my portfolio. Well, so much. I mean, in Northern Australia, so much of their economic growth and success is tied to the resource sector as well. So there's no, at the outset, there's no inconsistency here between the development of a resources sector and the development of Northern Australia. Indeed, right now, more than half of economic output in Northern Australia is from mining and resources. Now, I expect that percentage to fall over time because I hope that Northern Australia becomes more diverse in its economic base, although I'm sure that resources will maintain a very strong element of its development and growth. Now, you're right to point out we've established a $75 million CRC on growing agriculture in Northern Australia. They've already put forward their first round of projects last year in a small program, and they're considering their second round today. And I met with groups only a couple of months ago, the RDCs that cover agriculture in Australia, the research and development corporations, and there's a lot of excitement about industries, growing industries in Northern Australia, and there's a lot of good progress being made. The one thing we've got to do, though, in Northern Australia, it's similar to what I was mapping out here in this agenda, is make sure we keep support for that across the Australian community, because you're not going to grow agriculture in regional Australia without developing land. And to develop land, you sometimes have to clear land and laser level it and increase irrigation. And right now in Queensland, there's a Queensland government trying to pass probably the most draconian tree clearing laws in this country that will strip property rights off farmers and without compensation, and foreclose many of the agricultural opportunities we have in Northern Australia, particularly in Cape York, where there are many Indigenous Australians who want to just get ahead and they do want to grow their farming sector. So that is something we have to respond to. We also have to invest in water infrastructure. It's a big part of the Northern Australian agenda. So we're close to, and hopefully we'll start construction of the Rookwood Weir in the second biggest water catchment in this country, in the Fitzroy Basin, within the next few months. We finally have the support of the Queensland Government, which I welcome. The federal government's now considering that business case, and we'll respond within weeks to them. And I'm hopeful for a positive outcome, and we can actually build a dam in this country. Right? We're here in the Murray-Darling. It's a great place. We've got a lot of dams here. You only get reliable water supply in Canberra thanks to a lot of those dams. We want the same opportunity in Northern Australia as well, and I'm hopeful that we'll get that soon. Now, on the cricket situation. Okay, did I leave the weighty matters to second? But look, I am a huge cricket fan. Indeed, I'm often introduced with the fact that my father is very proud of the fact that I'm a senator for Queensland, but quite disappointed that I didn't reach my true calling and play for Australia. So it's very disappointing. As I said this morning, I hold the Australian cricket captain up on almost a pedestal as the Prime Minister, and it's incredibly disappointing that this has occurred. I want to now, I think we should focus on the opportunity that cricket team has in front of it to restore its reputation. It seems to me that but even before this incident, conduct over there in South Africa got a little bit out of control with some of the sledging that was occurring on the field. And in every crisis there is an opportunity, and perhaps an opportunity now for cricket to review their practices. There'll be some new blood coming into the team, and that's an opportunity to restore their reputation, restore their standards of behaviour, and hopefully recapture the will and trust of the Australian people.
Tom McAvoy.
Minister, thanks for your speech. Tom McElroy from the Financial Review. On the infrastructure side of things, could I ask you please about the Inland Rail project? This week, Infrastructure Australia left it out of its top high priority category for nation building infrastructure, putting it in the second tier of projects. The Rail Track Corporation says that its revenue won't cover the capital costs. Has the government made the case for the project? Are you disappointed that Infrastructure Australia didn't see it as a top priority?
Well, thank you, Tom. My understanding, and that infrastructure priority list is not in my portfolio, but my understanding of that list is it's largely a compilation of projects that come forward to Infrastructure Australia from states and territories. Obviously, the Inland Rail is a federal government priority. It's one that we've identified as a major priority, as is right, because it does involve the construction of a rail line across 3 different jurisdictions. And therefore it does, I think, fall to the federal government to make these kind of nation-building decisions which are going to benefit people right across 3 different states, not just in one state. I do contest your assertion that the ARTC has said that it won't make its capital costs back. Obviously there's a risk with any project, but my understanding is the ARTC has clarified that the Inland Rail has been placed on the Australian government's budget as at cost because it is expected to make its money back. Now, I think this is a project that is going to be a game changer for particularly many rural areas where wheat and cotton is now increasingly going from rail to truck. In southern Queensland, where I'm from, there's a lot of cotton going into containers rather than on rail, which is crazy. We're having more trucks in on our roads, doing damage to roads that already struggle to withstand the existing traffic. And really, bulk commodities should go on rail. So this is a well-needed investment. It's about time. And I think at this Rural Press Club address, it'd be appropriate for me to make the point that it seems to me sometimes that the nation's media take a forensic, and rightfully so, forensic investigation of infrastructure that occurs in rural areas like the Inland Rail, like the Adani Carmichael mine proposal. They should. That's good. But I don't see the same rigour and forensic nature applied to the $1 billion investment into the light rail proposal here in Canberra, or the $5 billion in the Western Sydney Airport. I support those projects. They're good. But let's use the same ruler across the whole country rather than apply different rule in the regions to one of the cities.
Before we take the next question, while you've been on your feet, the new Senator Tim Storer has spoken to the Senate and he says he cannot support the government's company tax cut for big business in its current form. He's voiced scepticism about its benefits, and he says that really it should be broad context with a broad discussion about tax reform. What's your response to that?
Well, Sabra, obviously haven't seen Mr Storer's comments, and I obviously will be disappointed if the government cannot achieve tax reform in this country. And I make the point again from a rural perspective. Business investments in rural areas and remote areas and in Northern Australia, which, like we've just spoken about, are inherently more risky. They're more risky investments because you've got fewer people, your markets are less robust, and you've got to take a punt sometimes. And a high tax rate, a high corporate tax rate, a high globally uncompetitive corporate tax rate like what we've got in this country, penalises risky investments above more so than non-risk investments. Penalises both, but risky investments are penalised much harsher. And so I think it'll be a negative and missed opportunity if we cannot lower corporate tax rates in this country to put Australia and regional Australia in particular in the same, hopefully similar at least, competitive footing as those overseas. But I recognise Mr Storer has only just arrived. Senator Storer now is only, I think this is his second week in the Senate. He seems like a very well considered individual, so I'm sure he's come to his views in that fashion. But of course the government will keep talking to crossbench senators. I would just make the point that only months ago Senator Hanson and One Nation were out there ruling out any support for corporate tax changes, and that's changed within a few months. So I'm sure my colleague Senator Cormann and the rest of the government will continue to speak to crossbenchers and do our best to get good economic reform for this country.
Peter Jean.
Hello, Minister. Peter Jean from The Advertiser. You mentioned in your speech your concern about mining jobs potentially coming out of regional communities. At a practical level, what can government do to discourage mining companies from doing that? Because if you've got jobs being made redundant by automation and the fact that machinery can be operated remotely from Perth, Adelaide, wherever, what at a practical level can be done to save those jobs?
Well, there are things that can be done, Peter. It's a very good question. I don't have the answers on the automation issue. It's something that really has been, it's something that really has been a more recent phenomenon, Peter. But I'll maybe go back to a situation that's been more long-standing in the mining sector and fly in, fly out, the fly in, fly out situation, which is similar in the sense that jobs can effectively be, or people can be effectively located anywhere, and their job can be in a regional area. In the case of FIFO, state governments have passed laws restricting that practice. In Queensland, they've outlawed 100% FIFO, which I think is right. I think jobs should be at least offered and given opportunity in regional locations. And so I think we need to think also about how the new technologies, which are FIFO-like, if you like, have an impact on regional jobs and what might be done to protect them.
Nick Evans.
Minister, Nick Evans from the West Australian newspaper. Minister, I stopped counting when I sort of got up to 20 references to coal in your speech, and I got up to a couple of mentions of lithium. And whilst it's one thing to say that you're keen for Australia to get some of the downstream processing value capture of that emerging industry in WA, where there's about $2 billion worth of projects in the pipeline and a number of mines under construction. But while WA is building those mines, China and other places are building the processing plants to take those raw materials. The industry is saying that the time for government to act in terms of that downstream processing is now. So it's one thing to say that you're keen to get it, but what are you going to do in order to ensure that Australia does get that value?
Yeah, it's a great question. Look, I'd say up front, I wish I could mention coal fewer times. I wish I could. It's not just me mentioning them, it's our friends who have made this event more exciting than most, perhaps, Press Club events, which is great. I hope the cameras picked them all up. We haven't had a streaky yet, though. So I wish it wasn't as controversial. I mean, I wish we could just get on with doing what we do best up there in central Queensland and the Hunter Valley. We make a lot of money for the country, pretty much propping up the. When I say we, I'm not really in the coal sector, of course, but I feel like I live in a community that relies on this sector. We go up and down. Our house prices go up and down with the ups and downs of the industry. And so it's frustrating when it's providing so much to the country and doesn't get much back, doesn't get a lot of respect back. Governments are happy to take the royalties, happy to take the taxes, but they don't do much to support it, and that's what's frustrating. And I'm going to go into bat for those hard-working people who work in our coal mining sector. I'll go into bat for them every day of the week and take up the fight for them because it delivers so much for our country. Now, on lithium, I did make a big part of the speech about the modern minerals. It's not just lithium, I should say, and I think it's important to note that lithium is one of the 35 critical minerals that the United States has identified, and it's one that we've trebled our production in the last 8 years. Great thing, but there's other opportunities too. Now, in terms of what the government should do to help establish processing facilities, well, I think the first point to make is normally, of course, that's got to be a decision for the commercial market to invest in those, and what we need to do is create a competitive environment to attract that investment, which includes having a competitive tax rate. That's one thing we should have. But I agree that we can also look for specific things we can do. I know there are companies in this space talking to the Northern Australia Infrastructure Facility, which I'd love to be able to support. They've got to work through that process, but the government's open to investments which might help bring more processing of rare earths and critical minerals to Australia, particularly to Northern Australia in that case. I'm open to the energy infrastructure and other infrastructure they might need to get that business case up and running. Of course, they'll also need cheap energy. That's another thing you need for minerals processing, as I mentioned in the speech. So that's another thing we're working on, and I hope we can come to an agreeable position with the Labor Party later this year to get some clear and consistent policies on energy to bring prices down and attract those value-added businesses, which I hope we really can do.
Anna Henderson.
Anna Anna Henderson from ABC News. Minister, I wanted to ask in relation to automation what role you see driverless trucks playing not only on mine sites but also on public roads in terms of freight, and what kinds of projections are you aware of, perhaps from Treasury or elsewhere, about how this will change the number of jobs that will be available on mine sites and in the trucking industry?
That's a great question, Anna. On the general point first, across the economy, right now we couldn't actually have an autonomous vehicle or driverless truck industry happen in Australia, because right now if you go out and drive to your next event after this and you put your GPS in on your phone, that GPS system is only accurate to about 5 to 10 metres, right? And I don't know about you, but I don't really want autonomous vehicles running around the road with a tolerance of 5 to 10 metres. It's not good enough. We've got one of the least accurate GPS systems in the world. It's enough to, Apple and Google to get you home, but it's not enough to rely on a robot driving you. We are currently funding some trials in Australia to increase the accuracy of our GPS system. In the locations we're doing that, it's getting accuracy down to potentially less than 2 centimetres in areas where there's a mobile phone network and less than 5 centimetres in the rest of Australia. It's essential to roll out precision farming, potentially an autonomous vehicle industry, as you mentioned. So we really see that as a needed investment for governments. Right now, what Rio and BHP and other mining companies are doing, they're investing in their own proprietary, effectively GPS systems. But other businesses that might not have the balance sheets can't just walk out and start using their mobile phones to get these things going. So I do think it's a real public good. I think it's something governments should look at doing, and that's why we're investing in these trials, and we'll hopefully, if things work out well, have more to say about rolling it around the country. On the general point about, in the mining sector, there has been some work done about the potential impact on jobs, and the initial work I've seen is that overall jobs won't probably be all that much lower, because of course there'll be related jobs in the management of autonomous vehicles, etc. My point is, I'm concerned those jobs, of course, will be more likely concentrated in cities, and I want to see the industry contributing to the bush and the regions as well, giving jobs to people who live out in those locations. I'm not going to probably give a considered view on whether autonomous trucks are coming to a town any time near you. Don't think I'm the expert on that. I don't think it's happening any time in the next few years, but obviously this is something we're looking at long term. That's why we're investing in these technologies. But before we do that, there just won't be any opportunities here in Australia.
Hu Xiaojing, sorry if I've mispronounced that.
Yeah, Xu Haijing from Xinhua News Agency of China. Minister, thank you for your speech. I guess we couldn't talk about Australia's long mining boom without mentioning China. Minister, are you optimistic about more exports of Australian iron ore and other mining products to China? By this question, I mean maybe two aspects. One is what do you think of China's economic future and its demands on Australia's ores? And the second aspect of my question is, do you think China will import more Australian ores despite the bilateral relationship deteriorate like we have witnessed in the past year, especially the political aspect and the loss of trust? Thank you.
Well, thank you, Hugh, for that question. The short answer is yes. Yes, I do see great opportunities to expand business with China, not just alone on resources, but across the board. As I mentioned in my speech, I still see this huge amount of growth in China to occur, and I get frustrated a little bit at the moment that some of the projections are that our coal exports to China, for example, might taper off, and our iron ore exports, because steel production may come off a bit. But as I said, I think most of these forecasts, probably the only thing you can get right is that they're all going to be wrong, and the overall trends are still very positive for China, and that means that's good news for Australia. In terms of our relationship and the other issues you raised, I'm a big believer that the front line of any diplomatic effort is business and trade. They're often the first ones into a country, and businesses and investment often establish the most enduring and trusting relationships compared to any government relationship. And I think it's very important that we continue to support bilateral business and investment links between our two countries, because I very much hope that the relationship between the two countries can strengthen over time. And again, similar to the comparison I made with the mining sector, we're always going to go through difficulties from time to time, but when you look back in the last 2 to 3 decades, we've come a remarkable way with China and our relationship with China, and I hope that can continue to grow. And I think the best way to work on that relationship is to continue to build those business, that investment, and we will get stronger. I would also say, of course, that we should seek to establish other commercial relationships with other countries as well. At the same time, to take advantage of those opportunities. And again, I think we should have a very strong relationship with India, a very strong relationship with India. And I might just take this point, my friends outside. Adani's, the investment of Adani would be the biggest Indian investment by far in this country, by far. And we turn our backs on that, and we've got to raise the question, are we turning our backs on an opportunity to partner with the fastest major growing economy in the world? One with which we share language. It's often said we share the 3 Cs with India: curry, Commonwealth and cricket. Cricket cannot always be the most unifying relationship to share, perhaps, from time to time. Curry's great, but they like it hotter than us, and the Commonwealth's a bit of a historic legacy rather than a future-looking one, and we really need to build commerce. We need to build commerce, a 4th C, I say, with India to cement that relationship and put ourselves in the same position that we benefit from a growing China to potentially benefit from a growing India as well.
Simon Gross.
Simon Gross from Canberra IQ. My question's about the Marine Reserves Management Plan that you got through the Senate yesterday.
Yep.
I see that it seems you got the next senator's support by redrawing some lines around Kangaroo Island. One of the focus generally in debate has been about fisheries and this plan, but I'm interested in your perspective on the implications for resources with this plan. And just on family matters, I wondered if you bought your mum a panettone last Christmas.
No, I don't. I think I might have only had panettone. Is it pronounced panettone once? But I did have some of Mum's or Nonna's really spaghetti the other night. Nonna's long passed away, but we still keep the recipe going. Mum's the best at making it, so I'm proud of my Italian heritage, as I have said before. Although I didn't realise it would tie me up in so much difficulty last year. But anyway, that's life sometimes. On the substantive, it's a very good question about the marine reserves. You're right. Most of the focus on marine reserves focuses on the impact on the fishing industry, and that's very important. But we do, of course, produce huge amounts of gas and some oil from our offshore areas and support the future development of those areas. We do, of course. We have the world's largest marine reserves, and I think the plans that have been put forward are very good ones. They're balanced ones. They generally do continue to allow resources exploration and development to occur in areas that are prospective. On Kangaroo Island, the points you raised, I spoke to some of the Nick Xenophon senators regarding that, and the advice I have is that the areas that they wanted removed from our offshore release acreage were not overly prospective, and therefore I don't think it's of any great risk to the future of the development of our resources sector. And we need to be practical about this. We need to be practical. We are not going to have coal seam gas wells popping up around major cities anytime soon, nor should we try. We should not have coal seam gas potentially occurring on prime agricultural land like where Fiona's from in the Liverpool Plains. We should neither do coal mining in those areas either. We need to be balanced about this. So I think what we've got in our offshore area is the right balance, and I think that's shown by the fact that my understanding is last night we won the vote, but we also won every crossbench senator onto our side.
Nick Stewart.
Thanks, Minister. Nick Stewart, Canberra Times. It's been a terrific speech, but it does sound, and I'm getting a bit older now, it does sound like the sort of speech that I've heard other resources ministers talk about in the past. I'm not sure you answered Nick's question at all, because you didn't say, for example, what we're doing to process lithium or rare earth here in Australia. I mean, are we doing anything, or are you just open to ideas?
No, we already are. There's a large processing facility, Nick, near Kwinana in Perth. That particular company is seeking to expand its facility. There are another couple of companies in the north, which I mentioned a I know in discussions with the Northern Australian Infrastructure Facility, those investments are commercial in confidence, but there are opportunities to do so. Traditionally, I think this particular review is a chance to look. One thing I would like it to look at, as I did mention, is how do we have the right policy settings in place to spur the development of the use of our resources to further jobs down the supply chain. As I say, primarily there's got to be a commercial incentive to do that, but in the past we have coincided with the development of bauxite deposits in Cape York, for example. There was a corresponding obligation on then CRA to invest in alumina refineries in Gladstone. And that was a state government, and state governments have responsibility for development of onshore resources like lithium or bauxite. But I think we do need to look again at how we can incentivise downstream investment in the supply chain. And I'll work with my state government colleagues on that. I make the point that the gas industry in Queensland's been fantastic, been a real boon for my region. It's effectively the saviour at the moment. I know people might not feel like that, but if it wasn't for the Queensland gas industry, we would have a lot less gas and we'd have a lot higher prices. It is higher cost of gas to produce, though. It's not as cheap as the Bass Strait. But I know in Gladstone there's a view that, well, what else did we get? We didn't get a petrochemical facility. We didn't underpin the cement or alumina manufacturing. The alumina refinery, which is underpinned by the bauxite mines, they're struggling at the moment to get gas, which is an essential input into alumina refining, but for the fact that down the road there's some of the world's largest gas export facilities going out of the country. So we've got to get that balance perhaps a bit better right. I don't have all the answers. I suppose that's why I wasn't able to completely answer the question, because I think it takes some new thinking given where we were and where we've come from, and I hope that this task force can come up with some good ideas in regards to that.
Paul Carp.
Paul Carp from Guardian Australia. Thanks for your speech, Senator Canavan. There have been reports EFIC has indirectly helped the Carmichael mine by funding Adani's suppliers. Could I please ask, how significant has that support been? How much more could be given through that mechanism? And is it enough to make a material difference to whether or not the Adani mine goes ahead?
Well, thanks for the question, Paul. I'm not aware of any support being provided by EFIC to Adani or its suppliers. However, that EFIC is a responsibility of my colleague, Minister Shobo, and I'd encourage you to just check with him. But to my understanding, there's been no support in that regard. EFIC does support from time to time industries that can expand their exports. It was a supporter of, in part, I believe the INPEX project, at least one of the gas projects in Northern Australia. From memory, it was the INPEX project, and I support EFIC's role. They're independent and make those decisions independently from government. So, look, I'm not aware of anything, Paul, but if you want to chase that up with Minister Chobo, he might better get back to you.
I just want to pick up on a point that you made in your speech about some groups abusing the court system to stop mining developments. How would you respond to the argument that they are using the system that's enshrined in our democracy, the court system, to challenge decisions?
Well, it's blatantly incorrect, because they themselves have said they want to abuse the court system to reach that goal. A few years ago, there was a meeting of a variety of these groups in the Blue Mountains in Sydney, and a leaked document came out of that meeting. It was titled "Stopping the Australian Coal Export Boom," and the first part of their strategy was to engage in judicial warfare. Effectively, that's my term, not theirs, but to engage in legal disputes, to hold up projects. It wasn't just about Adani. Hold up projects that could then allow them, give them the breathing space to run a political campaign to reduce support for it. It's played out. That's the playbook they're running from. That's their playbook, not mine. It's blatant. And I can't believe that we'd sit back and let our judicial system be abused in that way. The judicial system's there for a purpose, and there should be not only robust environmental laws, but also the ability to appeal government decisions in regards to mining or any other major development project. But we shouldn't allow groups, some of which were there in Sydney that day, some of which are overseas funded, to abuse our own democratic processes. I mean, there's a big controversy around the world about how other countries, say Russia or China or other countries, are seeking to abuse democratic processes for their own ends. Well, here we have millions of dollars coming out of the United States, groups in the United States seeking to influence our democratic processes, and what are we doing about it? Now, we as a government are trying to get through laws that will restrict overseas funded organisations, both government and non-government, from jeopardising and compromising our democratic processes. I hope we can get support for that, because you think there'd be not much more that is of fundamental importance to our country, that we maintain, that Australians maintain, the rights to direct how our country is governed, and then not be unduly influenced by money coming from other countries, some of whom are much, much more wealthier than we are. We should protect our sovereignty and say no and stop the overseas funded attempts to hijack our democracy.
David Denham.